All right. Well, thank you for ETHDenver for giving me the speaker slot, and thanks to everyone for finding themselves at this presentation. Certainly I'm excited to give it. My name's Taylor. I go by Polis Articus online, and I really enjoy building and thinking about decentralized social media, how we can create systems that align to the core objectives, or at least the core objectives when the internet was created, which ties into the topic of the presentation I want to give today called Digital Public Spaces in the Age of the AI Botnet Swarm, and how can we reclaim them. For brevity, I define a digital public space as an area where you don't need to log in order to view content. You don't need to hand over anything to be able to write to that database or any of that sort. So it's very much, like a public square instead of a kind of a private enterprise. So I thought I'd divide this talk into two sections, maybe spend the first 4 or 5 minutes talking about the history of why we need a re-architecture just to enjoy the basic services that we've become accustomed to online. And then through a case study called Hashchan, we'll go into these architectural decisions and how you guys can apply them in your apps down the line. So to begin, there was a dream that was the internet. If Tim Berners-Lee even whispered it at CERN, it would simply poof in a vanish. It spoke to a universal access to the world's information. There was a time where we typed in www. to go to a URL. I don't know, I haven't done that in a long time though. But we could communicate in real time with each other with complex data types. Perhaps it's the metaphysical postulate of the information age, that we affect the world by what we choose to browse. That's Tim Berners-Lee. And I'd like to ask you guys, what does it mean if only we can really browse bot spam? I'd like to pinpoint the beginning of why this architecture, can we get is that coming through? Okay, I'll just talk then, yeah. I'd like to begin this talk with the fallout of monetization. It really began in earnest with Web 2 monetizing the net. Advertisers would go into comment sections instead of buying ad space because it was just simply more effective. We saw advertisers then asking these platforms to say, hey, can we just have more user data so we can go better target these ads? We saw click farmers really get into the mix on everything and say, hey, we're going to farm engagement here, get the advertiser revenue. We're going to give fake likes to other people. And so this really created a self-perpetuating cycle that I'd say around 2016 was really picked up by political campaigns that began using the techniques and the information to create high-dimensional neural nets for the purposes of behaviorally nudging people into Team A or Team B. Needless to say, the cat was out of the bag, and we saw a paranational struggle for narrative dominance really ensue. So I think it's really natural that the users at the end of the line were the most affected. But in second place, it was the moderators and the sysadmins of those platforms that got subjected to employee infiltration, bribery of the sysadmins, corrupted moderation teams. So there was no shortage of people trying to create solutions to this. But for our purposes in the open internet, they were really Faustian. You would get one thing, but it would cost double the other. A good example being Cloudflare is that they provide you DDoS detection from these botnet swarms, but it would cost the users the user data. You get the Cloudflare cookies, it's game over. On the other side, you try to provide a space free from data mining, but then you're just subjected to flooding and content and spam. We saw advertisers become particularly choosy about which content they were associated with, even these comment sections. So we saw this departure of free speech being broken into this moniker, free speech is not reach. And we saw the beginning of the shadow and the heaven banning and the beginning of the splinternet. Nowadays, you need to fork over your phone number to use closed AI. You need to have a Google account pasted over if you even want to view a unmoderated section of Reddit. Search engines as well, I'm not sure if you guys agree, but it's a shadow of what it was a decade ago. And this could be pertain to many reasons, but SEO optimization and gaming the algorithm are just a couple of them. So needless to say, if the internet isn't dead already, then it's certainly dying. a homage to the dense internet theory that has made its rounds a couple of years ago. That explores this idea that more and more so by each passing day, we're interacting with bots instead of having a human-to-human interaction. And I don't know too, like, can you guys feel it? It's like there's this artificial inducement of memes, this repeating of content, this tyranny of the present in some sort of essence where you can't really find anything that hasn't existed more than 3 or 4 months ago. And if one thing is forgotten about, we're just on to the next thing and the next thing. Like, I swear they purloined the most darkest, deepest corners of psychology to find these most hypnotic inducing algorithms. So if there is a live internet maybe existing on the fringes, it's really hard physiologically to get there through the doom scroll. So I'd like to call this term the bot swarm gulag, where we show up for a service, but as each year goes on, we're just provided more of an illusion of that service, where the primary goal isn't talking and communicating with our communities, our nations, our friends, our family, but it's basically to provide data for the companies or get force-fed content by those companies. So we're there really in essence to train their botnets or be trained by their botnets. So the image of a digital dairy farm where, needless to say, we're not the farmers, we're the cows. So that kind of ends it with the history piece. I want to go into architectural decisions now that we can take that ideally brings life back to the open digital places of the internet. And I chose open access forums because they are really uniquely situated in a space where they're helpless. We hear a lot, especially in the Web3 days, these days about decentralized identity, DIDs, provide a retina scan to something, provide a palm scan to something else. In open access, but we don't have a digital scanner of anything, you can't even use those. They're not even Faustian. They're just non-solutions at all. So the existing toolkit doesn't really work. And also maybe as well, there was a hope at least a couple years ago that the bot spam that we were receiving might actually improve these spaces. We'd have these philosopher AIs going around to all the corners of the net, providing great context, providing great reasoning. But we've seen from different, Crest Research, I think, was one that put on, is that we're just going to flood these spaces with drivel with the hopes of just guiding these individuals into more monetizable portions of the net. So I think one of my favorite quotes, I don't know if it was Descartes or Voltaire, but they say, if any community gets its laughs by pretending to be idiots, they'll eventually be flooded by other idiots who mistakenly believe they're in good company. And so, yeah, if we're mimicking the idealisms that are being dominated, and there's a select group of individuals deploying bot swarms dominating the signal-to-noise ratio, we got to be really careful about imitating and leading up with a lot of drivel we see in these spaces. So to begin, I'd like to take you through the journey of a user to a particular website, starting from the very beginning. When a user logs on, they'll always go to a DNS record behind a static IP. We can get rid of this. We can just simply give a website in a zip file and have them interact with distributed databases, either on a high end with their own RPC provider, or actually go out to all the people building homes and say, hey, you have a furnace, let's give them 20 terabytes and their own node. And so just give them an archive node. And so Nick Sasbo said it best, trusted third parties are security holes. By eliminating the need for a DNS record and a static IP, we get rid of, number one, the IP logging, the MAC address hard logging, the Cloudflare cookies, the Google cookies, whatever's happening behind the scenes on these sites. We talk about mod infiltration, sysadmin infiltration, creating subgraphs of individuals as well. We see one graph on the surface, whatever graph is being deployed underneath the surface remains a question. We can get rid of all that. And because invalid transactions aren't propagated by the mempool, we also receive a degree of horizontal scaling against DDoS. This means we can get rid of Cloudflare as well. And also, on a nice flip side, as we saw this with Internet Archive, now that all messages are being propagated at block speed, we get archiving comes free. And because everything is cryptographically signed, we get anti-shadow banning guarantees. Yes. The second point is that normally when a user hits this website, they'll be asked to log in. Lots of stuff being asked here about creating portable identities. I think we can do one greater. We can create toggleable identities. We can allow the user object to become amorphous, in essence, and choosable by that. You say portable identity, it requires these 5 things. We can say, hey, you don't need them at all. You can bring 1, you can bring 5. And so we can accomplish this just by how they choose to fund their wallet address. So at the high end, if you wanted to create like a Reddit karma service, you could say, hey, you have to have an ENS record. You need to have a year's worth of posting history. If you want to go a level below that, you can say, hey, just fund a fresh wallet through a KYC exchange, probably roughly equivalent to the centralized services we have today. Whole slew down there around non-KYC exchanges, all down to the tail end for this, at least, about using a chip mixer for a fresh wallet. So one of the probably core issues around what I was curtailing with is how do you get rid of the bot spam without these centralized services. And what I found is that simply by having a transaction fee associated with every single post, we get a natural tuning friction. And I'll do as an addendum here as well, is that who wants to pay to post? I don't think anybody. But I think, and this is the bet of Hashchan as well, is that it will be this sort of golden age that we tell people in 10 years' time that it's like, oh yeah, we used to have clear comms throughout the net. And like, that will just be like, whoa, really? Like, we never enjoyed that before. It's like, so in order to have clear comms in the next decade, something will have to happen. I think this is the best way. But we can see that just by providing a small transaction fee, that an individual will pay to post one thing, but a flooder who wants to engage in any sort of strategy around spamming or shilling or flooding, saying, hey, I need to post 100 times, 1,000 times just to execute my strategy, they'll see that order of magnitude cost increase go. In the Web 2 world today, as soon as you got your botnet set up, a nice set of IPs distributed, the cost of flooding is the same as the cost of posting. And so you can go, okay, you can say, hey, I'm on a really cheap chain. I've seen like 10 to the negative cents per post on these lighter chains. So like doing it through the setup we'll talk soon, it's like really, really cheap. But if you're still getting a lot of spam, you can go to a heavier chain such as Ethereum. And then you can see that order of magnitude scale up really amplify. So like if it's on a small chain, it's like maybe 1,500. If it's on Ethereum and it's $1 to post, you get 15,000. And so it's like huge difference. And like I think we saw it a week ago as well, that if an individual really wants to tell the truth on something, you can start burning their ether. So if you want to like burn 1.3 million of your ether to say something, this is a way to do it. That's the way it's easy. So we talked about writing to the database. Now next is talking about reading to the database. And we had a really good conversation from AWS about implementing the graph nodes. I want to do the dirty solution, and that's client-side event log indexing. We don't need a catch-all generic solution if you can fit your use case to a client-side index. So for example, for a social network, if they want to look at a thread, they only have to index the thread. They don't have to index the entire blockchain. Like what's the cost of a chain reorg? Likely minimal. And so this can come down to the user choosing an RPC that suits their needs, getting their own archive node. I tried this a couple years ago, and I'll need to say it's a lot better place today than it is 3 years ago. Infura did a wonderful job indexing the event logs themselves. I haven't even come across a block range index for Ethereum with them. Quite a different story from other chains, but by using event log and client-side indexing, we can just pull the data as needed to one person's use case and go from there. On the flip side as well, incentive structures can exist that like just say, okay, I indexed it, I'm going to float it into the atmosphere, and someone else that shows up on the net could pull that, do a quick verify, or just trust it, depending on your needs. So that leads, so we have some text committed. We got to talk about the images, right? Too heavy to paste on chain. So we use IPFS here, but the main point that I want to talk about is about handling individual and platform liability. The unique system that we have here at Hashchan is that it makes it non-platform and non-platform or non-user liability. We've seen in these edges of the net that illegal content, DCMA, and copyright are really, really potent lawfare techniques to take a site down. Especially for the smaller ones, they have a really limited budget, really limited time. All you gotta do is really just find out. Say, hey, this person has 10 hours to moderate. Let's just do 11 hours worth of content damage. So by making an individual responsible for their own content, we can bring that liability off the platform. On the peer-to-peer side, it's also been an attack vector. We saw, perhaps like from ZeroNet back in those days, that if you become responsible for hosting the image content of another user on the node, then you're just starting to propagate these images. You don't know where they're from, and it is a huge liability. So this solves that as well from both the other peer side. Users can then opt in to pinning other users' images to create liveliness on the network. And to also, if you want to create an incentive structure around this that increases liveliness, it's a natural way to go forward. So now that we have this kind of idea around images and how we're protecting ourselves from different types of illegal images, we talk about the moderation services. Blue Sky did a really good job with their pluggable moderation services, even though they do, I believe, to best of my knowledge, hard code their moderation service into their client. And there's some other aspects of that tech stack that are super expensive to implement for another user that just wants to show up. In systems like this, it's pretty much you can go. But we want to make pluggable moderation services to handle the moral hazard of corrupt sysadmins and overzealous mods. So the idea is that also we don't want them to delete content. We want them to provide filtering of content. And so in this way, we provide and we maintain a unified graph of all transactions. So a user, based on their own preferences, can choose different moderation services. We can have different rating systems attached to those services. And it provides a cryptographic link from a moderation services contract to the actual moderator. So the question will be how those moderations are actually being implemented, and we can have the moderator do signed messages over WebRTC. So they're looking at all the posts that are coming in and say, hey, we don't like this, we're going to sign it, we're going to use OrbitDB, provide authentication on top, and anyone who's subscribed to our moderation service will know cryptographically that the moderator is the moderator of that particular post. And so we can do this via WebSocket, but as a central point of failure, services like libPGP and OrbitDB do have WebRTC coming down the line, and that means you only need a cluster or a growing cluster of really, really micro-stun and turn services just to facilitate the initial connection. Doesn't even have to be connected to the original thing, at least to the best of my knowledge. So perhaps the last point that I want to touch on is that by associating a piece of content with an Ethereum address, it becomes fair use ready. And by fair use ready, we see the AI companies today just scoping the net out of everything, doing the lawfare calculus, deny, defend, oppose, whatever. We're going to make $100 billion on this. Who cares if we pay $10 billion in legal costs? But the point being is that if fair use ever does come down the line, it's a lot easier for a company to say, hey, just push this 10 Ether or whatever to this address instead of trying to facilitate 100 or 1,000 different Visa connections or whatever they need to do. So doing this model makes it much more suitable for retro PGF and fair use attributions. So in conclusion, the fallout from Web 2 monetization has birthed this idea called the bot swarm gulag. Here we're providing an illusion of these services where each by day they're actually getting more degraded and we're just being sent there to train their bot swarms. The existing solution space that protects users from this sort of digital gulag effect is really, really ill-suited to digital public spaces, because just by definition, we can't have a user account. So by using Web3 technologies, we can preserve digital public spaces and hopefully and ideally get back to those original core ideas that drove the original founders of the internet to even create it. So thank you.